So great. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our biweekly CySER webinar. Today, we're honored to have Karl Scheuerman, who is currently a manager for Crowdstrike's Falcon Complete Managed Detection and Response Service. Previously, he spent several years as an analyst and researcher on Crowdstrike's Overwatch threat hunting team. He began his career as a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer and continues to serve in the Air National Guard as a commander of a 71-member cyber threat intelligence squadron. Karl holds multiple SANS certifications, a Bachelor's of Science degree from the U.S. Air Force Academy, and a Master's in Public Policy degree from the University of Maryland, College Park. He lives in Richland, Washington with his wife and 3 daughters, and you can find his LinkedIn. Find him on LinkedIn at the link that's provided in the flyer. Today, he will be talking about cybersecurity operations on the front line, which is a very timely topic, particularly in the last 2 months. So I'll turn it over to Karl.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Noelle. It's really a privilege to be here with you all to share and engage. I certainly owe big thanks also to Deb Wells, Professor Wells from Central, who got me plugged in here to learning about all the great things you guys are doing here with the CySER program. Also, Professor Van Wee, who's gotten me connected as well, and who we look forward to continuing to work with for some of the other partnerships too, with the squadron that I'm affiliated with at the Air Guard and the CySER program as well. So. And then, of course, Gabriel and Noel, too, for facilitating, making this happen for me to get on here on this Zoom today on this webinar call with you all. So, yeah, happy to spend some time here with you to share just some thoughts from my perspectives on what I get to see on a regular basis in my day job here, where I work with Crowdstrike, which is a cybersecurity product and services vendor. And also I'll share too some as well from my Air National Guard background and perspective with some thoughts on what we get to see there as well as future opportunities for even some of you maybe to consider. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Let's make sure. Can you all see my screen and hear me okay? Thumbs up?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay. So you heard some about my background there already, as Noelle shared. Yeah, well, not much more to say about that other than I'm a Northwest guy at heart. So I live here in Richland, Washington, in the Tri-Cities. So to learn what you guys are doing with the whole DoD sponsored CySER program really got me excited as I learned more about it as Professor Wells was talking to me about it. So really glad to be able to hear what you guys are doing and here to virtually be somewhat of a small part of it. I've spent most of my life here in the Northwest and even some work here with Pacific Northwest National Laboratory here before joining Crowdstrike. So it's cool to see such great cybersecurity focused training happening here in our local area. A lot of resources and great people, institutions, and universities to take advantage of. So this is cool to see, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. So I shared some thanks there again for the opportunity to do this. And as I move in here, what I'm going to talk about is some from my perspective based on my career and what I get to do currently in my job. My thoughts on what are some of the key components to having an effective cybersecurity operation to defend a network. Very much from an operational perspective. I know you guys are in your different university programs doing research and a lot of things focused in academia. So hopefully this gives you, with what I share, some thoughts from a very operational, practical, day-to-day front lines perspective. That's why I titled this talk Cybersecurity Operations from the Front Lines. What does it really look like day to day, and what are some of those key aspects to a successful defensive operation, all in all, that then can give you all considerations as you move through and continue your educational programs, as you prepare to move into your careers, based on what these opportunities look like from a real world frontline perspective. Maybe that'll help inform your decisions on which areas within the cybersecurity domain you want to focus on and apply to as you move into the civilian or government or military career world as you enter the workforce. So I'll share some thoughts there. I will go into a few real world examples, as that's always interesting. Hey, what do things really look like at the ground level, and hopefully give some valuable takeaways there that are entertaining as much as they are educational. And then lastly, yeah, I will focus specifically on career opportunities that I'm aware of and tracking here, both from a Crowdstrike perspective, and then I will touch on the Air National Guard piece too. Being a member of the Air National Guard, it's like an obligation. You have to be, you're a shameless recruiter, always wanting to spread the word, because there's a lot of good stuff out there happening in the military. Of course, everybody knows about active duty. That's well popularized. But in the reserves and National Guard are not very well known. There's a lot of stuff happening there that people just don't know about, but that can provide some unique opportunities to people who may not otherwise be aware. So I will share just briefly on that as well. And I'll be sure to leave times for Q&A at the end, as I know we want that to be a part of our time together as well. So so here we go. Let's talk about really Karl's personal perspective on key pillars to what makes a strong defensive operational construct to defend networks from various sorts of the most common types of attacks that we see out in the world today, as we're defending whether small, medium, large, enterprise level networks. Really, what are some of those key components? And I'm going to talk about these from a functional perspective, and I'll just go right into it here. If I were to boil it down to some of the key primary ones, and this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list, but what are some of the key functions and practices that you as a team would need to implement to effectively defend a typical network in deployment today out in the wild on the internet, to defend it against the most typical types of attacks that we see, from the full range of the less sophisticated script kiddie, commodity level, noisy attacks out there prevalent across the internet, all the way up to type operations, or even the destructive types of operations also that get a lot of headlines. So these are some of the most prioritized aspects of that defensive posture that I personally would recommend and emphasize. And I break it down this way because this is what I've seen to be most effective in my career and in my experience, is to have both people and teams, as well as complementary tools and capabilities and technologies to enable these various functions. So we'll start at the top with threat detection and prevention. This should be obvious and probably the most well known, but yeah, these are those automated capabilities in a lot of ways. Like think of antivirus systems, things that are going to identify known threats, and if you can, better yet, you're going to set up some systems taking advantage of those types of antivirus capabilities, EDR types of solutions that then can automatically block those threats as they happen. That's great when you can get to that automated aspect of identifying and blocking and preventing the known threats that are out there. Threat hunting, and so it's largely a reactive discipline there with threat detection and prevention, but one of those core starting points in order to defend against the volume of threats that are out there in the wild. Next, you get into threat hunting, which is a more proactive approach to identifying threats that are going to bypass what the threat detection and prevention, the detection and response things are going to be able to do. Inevitably, adversaries are crafty, they're smart, they know, they test, they're going to find ways to bypass your existing security controls, the preventative measures. And so you need to have proactive threat hunting to be there, scouring across networks to look for those bad guys who may be hiding out and have gotten by that threat detection and prevention. Next, you get into incident response and remediation. You've got to have this as a part of your security team to defend a network, because inevitably you're going to have things that go wrong. You're going to have things that need that deeper investigation and that actual time to go in and fix problems or remediate potential malicious activities. And you need people focused and dedicated to do that, because it's a special skill set, and also that you need them to do that while the threat hunters and the SOC analysts are continuing to do the hunting and the monitoring and detection of things already. Next, we get into threat intelligence. This is an aspect where not always is popular, not always is common on typical network security teams. However, a very critical component, I would argue, and it's something that we leverage to a great extent here at Crowdstrike. I know a lot of other teams too, but this is where you're going to get that context around the threats that are impacting your organization that you're trying to defend. And as we like to say here at Crowdstrike, it's the real proper way to think about the threats that we all experience across the internet today is not in the sense that you have a malware problem or some sort of attack type problem. What you really have is an adversary problem. There's people, there are evil people on the other end actually conducting the various types of attacks that we see, the full range of those attacks. And so intelligence allows us to understand who those adversaries are, what their motives are, and then based on your circumstances, give a context-informed understanding on the right security postures, right practices that an organization needs to take to properly establish their defenses. Next, we get into pen testing. This would be another one of those proactive measures, similar to threat hunting in the sense that it's proactive. It's something that you want to do to help you prepare for the potential attacks that will inevitably come. But in pen testing, of course, that's where you have people on your own team, the friendlies, who are going to act like the bad guys, to go in and emulate what the bad guys do to try and poke holes in your network, and then you can learn from those experiences to better take measures to respond to any of the holes that the pen testers did happen to find. And then lastly, I made a category for somewhat of a catch-all category here for security architecture, engineering support. You need, all those support functions that enable the defensive operations to happen, just as critical as any of the other functions. It seems like in any place I've been, whether it's working in threat intelligence, managed detection and response, the threat hunting piece, those are the areas I've had the most experience in. But I think the other niche areas as well would say the same thing. Like, you're all largely dependent on engineering support to help build, enable, and maintain the capabilities that all these teams use to do their day-to-day business to help protect the network. So again, this isn't necessarily all exhaustive, all comprehensive. There are other probably teams or functions that you could argue would be part of a defensive operation on the front lines to properly defend a network. But the reason I also break it down this way and talk about these is because there are a lot of times where I get young folks, university students or high school students, or maybe people considering a change in careers who are young in their career, who are interested in going into cybersecurity as a career choice. And so a lot of times I think there are misconceptions about, I can just become a cybersecurity analyst. I'll just go into cyber and do cyber as the buzz term is. And I think it's healthy for those folks, and what I usually recommend and advise when I'm talking to people like that, and I imagine many of you being students in this program are in this boat as well, I often will advise and recommend those individuals to understand that cybersecurity is a very broad career field with a lot of niche focus areas. And I kind of break them down in this way personally. You can go, the SANS Institute has a similar way of breaking down the specialties within cybersecurity, different career paths. Really take the time to think and evaluate each of these aspects to cybersecurity, so that you can then begin to focus your expertise, your training, the courses that you take, because then when you apply for a job, you don't want to just apply to a company because you think the company does great and does cool things. We get a lot of people that come to Crowdstrike because they've heard about Crowdstrike in the news or one way or another, and it sounds like a great company to work for. I want to work for Crowdstrike. I'm just going to throw my resume out there and hope that I can get any job in that company. That is not a good way to go about looking for a job, at least in the private sector, in the tech world. Instead, what most employers are looking for are experts, people, even if you're young, coming out of school, are you excellent at malware analysis, that we could maybe put you on our threat intel team to do reverse engineering for malware? Or are you really good at network security monitoring? You understand network protocols, you can evaluate set that's going to make you very attractive to people trying to fill analyst roles within a security operations center. So, threat detection, prevention, managed detection, response, that kind of thing. Those niche areas, you want to understand what the niche areas are, and then find which ones are most interesting to you. And then that piece that gives you a leg up on the competition, because as you craft your resumes and tailor them for those various job applications, as you go through your coursework or you take additional training or pursue certifications outside of school, you can focus all those to highlight yourself as a growing expert in one of these areas, because it's impossible to be a jack of all trades and be an expert in all of them. And most employers are not looking for an inexperienced generalist. Typically, they're looking for people who have some strong, deeper skills in one of these areas. So just some words of advice to pass along that I hope you all consider. So next, the next and last piece I'll share here from I guess a philosophical perspective is to help tie this all together, and how these disciplines in some ways complement each other and work together. We've got a brief example here, an illustration that we use that kind of describes these teams working together and how it leads us to that defense in depth construct that all network defenders are trying to reach. Defense in depth being that axiom that we know, hopefully you learn about as you go through your studies. When you're trying to defend a network, as in many other aspects of anything you're trying to defend, you want multiple layers of defense that an attacker would have to bypass to get to your key resources internally. So with that defense in depth concept in mind, here's another analogy that we use sometimes to describe, that's based on the pyramid. And we use a pyramid because at the base of the pyramid, to represent the most common threats that we see out in the wild, are going to be those known, noisy, commodity types of threats. This is your known or old malware, or maybe malvertising and stuff that's known. The noisy spearfishes like the Emotet malware that's common these days, or maybe older forms of ransomware like WannaCry that has been around for a long time, or just script kiddie type stuff as well. This stuff is prevalent. It's spread out in mass spam campaigns, often that lead to those types of infections. So so it's at the bottom of the pyramid because it's the most prevalent types of threats that are out there. We see them all the time. But they're also the lowest level of sophistication. So base of the pyramid. In order to counter that, you see an acronym there called NGAV. That's a term that's common in the industry these days. One of those buzz terms for next gen antivirus, but really all it is that antivirus capability, that monitoring, detection, and prevention automated function that you should have on your network. There's a lot of different vendors out there who provide those sorts of technologies. You got to have it. I'm sure most of you have it on your systems, your laptops that you're working on right now. That's a necessity. You got to have it. But as you move up the pyramid, if you are part of an organization that's probably going to be targeted, which really everybody's a target these days, chances are if an adversary is really going after you, they're going to use some more advanced TTPs if they're really serious about trying to breach your network. So they're going to use more advanced TTPs, like maybe novel malware that they're going to go, and it hasn't been seen before, and they're going to test it against known antivirus signatures and open source malware testing repositories. So they know it's not going to necessarily flag on an existing antivirus services systems, or more advanced TTPs. Maybe they're just going to bypass the malware thing entirely, and they're going to use fileless malware techniques that don't write anything to disk and just run in memory. So again, a typical just standard antivirus defensive measure alone isn't probably going to be enough. So there you're going to need some additional tools and capabilities. So you see an acronym on the counterpart there for the middle portion of the pyramid called EDR, that stands for endpoint detection and response, which is another feature, another tool that exists in the tool belt for most security analysts as they try to defend networks, that give them visibility not of what's happening on the endpoints, what's happening on the laptops, on the workstations, on the servers. It's telemetry of the behaviors happening on those systems that they can analyze and do additional investigation if indeed the malicious activity isn't prevented by the antivirus's prevention capabilities. Something you've got to do if you're going to respond to attacks that are happening. Nowadays, you'll see a similar, nowadays, instead of EDR, they talk about XDR, extended detection and response, where it's taking in logs and data, not just from the endpoints, but from other tools that are deployed throughout the network tools, and firewall logs, all sorts of stuff coming into an extended detection and response repository. But nonetheless, it's the same concept. You've got to have data to analyze and investigate in order to dive in when your preventative capabilities aren't going to necessarily be able to stop everything. And if you see things out there that, oh, you should be able to just automate and prevent all sorts of threats all the time, like, don't buy into it. That's snake oil salesman type of stuff. Like the really smart attackers, they just human nature. They will find ways to take advantage of soft points in defenses, and sometimes it's not even defender's own fault. Sometimes those security gaps can be the result of human error, as we'll talk about here as we go along. So lots of considerations there. So ultimately, to complete this analogy I'm talking about here with the pyramid, as you get to the top of the pyramid, what I'm trying to represent there is, okay, what about, you've got EDR or XDR to help defend against those more advanced attacks, those more advanced TTPs. TTP on this slide means tactic, technique, procedure, another common acronym we use in our cybersecurity world. But what happens if you've got those really sophisticated adversaries who not only are they gonna not do anything to trip any alarms with your antivirus, also when they get in and they're working on, when they gain access to a system, they're gonna blend in and not do any sort of behaviors to even stand out and make it appear that somebody's there that shouldn't be. Maybe they're gonna, take advantage of social engineering to get somebody to install something on their system that they don't realize they're supposed to install. Or maybe somebody's somehow, they've taken advantage of a user who has given up access to their credentials for the network. Maybe this individual has reused their credentials on a third-party service and it's being used against them. Or maybe their phone, which is used for multi-factor authentication, is the attacker is trying to bypass that multi-factor authentication through some means, like just repeatedly sending those prompts until the user just wants to get it off their screen, so they just hit accept, and then boom, the attacker's in that way. I mean, there's just a myriad of number of ways that a smart adversary is going to gain access to valid accounts. And when that happens, what are you going to do? Well, you need another one of those complementary functions that I talked about on the previous slides, is where a threat hunter would come in, and they're going to be proactively looking for the network for even the most subtle clues that you have somebody on that network that shouldn't be there. So maybe they, as a threat hunter, you're going to be looking for something like a "who am I" command that is run on an endpoint. That's run a lot of times. System administrators do that all the time, right? Well, if an adversary gets on there, they may do that as well for the purposes of reconnaissance, initial discovery, once they gain access to that valid account. How are you going to distinguish when that's used maliciously versus all the other times it's used legitimately? That's the level of expertise that a threat hunter would get to. But you got to have it because inevitably that's the sort of things that attackers do. So if you want to find them before they can actually complete any of their objectives, you need to have threat hunters as one component of defend the front lines. All right, so enough about the theory. Let's talk about some real world examples. Overall, big trends. What do we see? Again, I'm part of the Managed Detection Response Service team here at Crowdstrike. So what we do is there are a number of customers out there, various levels and sizes all over the world, small organizations, small schools, mom and pop shops, all the way up through the Fortune 500 big companies that use us as a service. Our company provides what we call the Falcon platform, which is a security suite with various modules like antivirus prevention capabilities and those XDR, EDR capabilities, and all sorts of other stuff as well. And in addition to that product, we also offer services. So a threat hunting service, which I used to be on prior to my current team, Yeah, we offer a threat hunting service. We offer a threat intelligence service. We offer, the team I'm on currently is our managed detection and response service. We do that detection and response, like a managed service security provider is another term you might hear regarding that. So that's what our team does. So across our threat hunting and threat detection response teams, we're protecting thousands of customers, which means we see attacks all day, every day, of all types and of all levels of sophistication. And we track all those attacks pretty closely. So here's, over the last several quarters, just a breakdown of when we analyze those attacks, defend against them, and understand what's going on. We, as part of that tracking, will bin all the attacks that we see into various types of categories with that tracking. And of course, one of those things we track is the motive of the adversaries involved. And so you can see the breakdown there. The majority of what we see typically is criminally motivated attacks, but certainly see a lot of what we call targeted attacks. That may be a little confusing if you're not familiar with that terminology, but the term targeted in our world means state-sponsored espionage. So that's what that's all about. A little bit of hacktivism. We don't see a lot of hacktivist activity. It's just compared in volume to the other types, not as prevalent. And then of course there inevitably are those attacks where there's just not enough evidence to confidently attribute to a certain actor, let alone motive. So that's what the breakdown there looks like as far as what we see. But on a daily basis, this is we see multiple criminal state-sponsored attacks every day, and every day there's many of those that involve not just the automated types of attacks, but these are actual bad guys who are getting access to networks, and in some cases, when it's some of our customers who don't have their configurations set properly, so it provides an avenue for bad guys to actually gain access to the endpoints. And so we track and identify and watch what they do when they gain that access. And they're hands-on keyboard interactive, trying to, in a criminal's case, a lot of times they're trying as quickly as possible to gain access, spread, move laterally, and ransom the network through their ransomware deployment. Versus state-sponsored actors, they usually move more slowly because they're trying to stay under the radar for the purposes of long-term intelligence collection. So generally, those are just some overall bigger trends of what we see. This here is just an explanation of a lot of the intrusion attempts that we see. The vast majority of them do not even involve malware, because adversaries are getting smarter. They know that if you employ a piece of malware as part of your attack, it's getting harder for them to develop malware that's not going to be picked up by the preventative technologies that are deployed out there. So they're just kind of getting around exploiting maybe a vulnerable server that's publicly facing, or again, get access to valid credentials or abuse multi-factor authentication. If they can gain access in some of those ways, they're going to. And when they gain access to accomplish their objectives, they're just going to use native tools that already exist. And I'll share an example of that here. So another interesting trend just to highlight. Okay, so what does it look like? What's one of these attacks look like that we again see on a regular basis? So I've got two quick examples here that I'll go through. This was a case where this was a government organization, and we're protecting their network, but they were new. They were just coming to us, so they had what turned out to be, we didn't know at the time, but we always suspect when we get a new customer, a pre-existing infection. So when you're bringing them on, at the time, we didn't know who you never really know at the beginning who's behind any sort of malicious behavior. You always got to do the investigation and work with the customer and figure out what's going on. And then you can always do the postmortem to understand. But it turns out when we did the postmortem, this was a suspected state-sponsored adversary. But the way it all started is as they were deploying the Falcon sensor to their endpoints, becoming a new customer, the first thing that our threat hunters saw was an unusual command executed under a web server process. So this was an externally facing Windows server under the IIS W3WP worker process. We saw a taskless command executed. So taskless, hey, it's run a lot of times on the network. Admins use it all the time to identify what processes running on a host. And so, but adversaries like to do the same thing because they're running reconnaissance, trying to figure out and prepare for their next steps. And so our threat hunters, because they're their bread and butter is to distinguish when there's those subtle behaviors that may indicate something unusual is happening. They picked up on it, and then they transfer that over to us as the managed detection and response team, so we could go in and start doing further deeper dive investigation and remediation as necessary. So as we dug in and started pulling back the onion, here's the full scope of what we identified and found. Turns out the adversary had gained access to the server through, because we didn't have visibility prior, we didn't know exactly the initial access, but likely exploited some sort of vulnerability on the server to gain that access months prior, because we saw there were timestamps on the initial files, on the initial web shell that they dropped, that that showed that they had been active on the system for months. And then with that access, then they placed those ASPX-based web files on the system, and we're using that to maintain access, conduct their command and control, and specifically then dropped another implant called the Sharp shell, which is a DLL file that then contains a payload that is that when compiled turns into the Sharp shell implant. It's obfuscated in a way that's beyond my level of understanding, and that's what we have reverse engineers and our solid threat intel team to identify and cover. And so, but based on the behavior, the types of obfuscation it was using, and the infrastructure and the target set, they were able to piece together with some degree of confidence that that this was a suspected state-sponsored adversary. And then, of course, with that access, they were just maintaining access. They had come back here to just do some maintenance and continue their discovery and reconnaissance for long-term collection. So, so in the end, we were able to identify those malicious files as artifacts from the installation of the web shell and the DLL that was compiling the Sharp shell implant. We did some additional scoping. Turns out it was also present on another system as they were rolling out the sensor. So as we're gaining visibility, it wasn't being used, but it was present. So we remediated that as well. And yeah, as I mentioned, given all the circumstantial evidence, our threat intel team did identify this as a likely state-sponsored adversary, likely an Iranian-based adversary. The image there is because our marketing team likes to give funny names and images to the different adversary groups across the different countries that we track and identify. So Iran's national animal is a kitten, so they use kitten images to represent Iranian-based adversaries. So that's the story there. For time's sake, I'll just move ahead. I've got one more quick. This was a let's see. I got this, and I'm almost done. This was a Carbon Spider attack. Carbon Spider is adversary that's notorious. They've been around a long time. This is a criminally motivated adversary. They used to do like point of sale malware and some of the more traditional financially motivated types of things. And they have since moved into the big game, high profile ransomware attacks. They were responsible for the dark side ransomware wave that happened over the last couple of years, the Colonial Pipeline attack. These guys are just notorious, based out of Eastern Europe, and still continue to do their thing. So we picked on this through, this was a customer in the medical, this was a medical institution, healthcare institution, and saw some suspicious activity happening where Reg Server 32 executed an unusual command and using what's called the squiggly do technique. I don't know if any pen testers out there, but it's an abuse of Reg Server 32, which is a native tool to bring down remotely hosted files that could be malicious. So that's what they were trying to do, and that's what we picked up on. We also picked up on, because they immediately did that, turns out they had also compromised this Exchange server with the Proxy Shell collection of vulnerabilities that had been exploited. So we picked up on all that. We blocked that because the squiggly do technique is well known. It was automatically blocked. They then tried to bring down with their Proxy Shell access a Cobalt Strike stager DLL, but Cobalt Strike is also something we are well known and prepared for. So that was also blocked automatically by the product. And then, so then they just tried to download the Net Support Manager, suite, which is a legitimate administrative tool, which we see a lot of times, whether it's TeamViewer, AMI Admin, a lot of times adversaries, when they get tired because they can't install their malware, they'll just try to install legitimate administrative tools to try and do some of their activities that way. But that then becomes a little more obvious because that host isn't supposed to have that either. So so we're able to pick up, track them, block them. As soon as we picked it up, we contained the machine and did the remote remediation. Our team is able to do remote remediation through the product, so it makes it easy for the customer. And then based on the C2 infrastructure used, our CrowdStrike intelligence team and that behavior chain of the attack I mentioned, high confidence that this was indeed Carbon Spider. All right, career opportunities. A note here. Of course, CrowdStrike has full-time career opportunities. We have a careers page you can go to if, after you graduate later in your career, you want to go pursue some of those things. Certainly encourage you to do so. But I know a lot of you are still students in school, and Professor Van Wee had mentioned interest potential that you may have in internship opportunities. So I apologize for the wall of text on this slide, but I don't work with interns regularly in my role, but I know the company has a lot of internship opportunities. So I wanted to put all the information here for you, even though I don't get to do this on a daily basis, but I wanted it all to be here. So yeah, we do take interns typically over the summer for a 12-week period. Some are remote, some are in office. Our managed detection response team that I'm on, if you are joining our team as an intern, you would have to be in St. Louis, Austin, Texas, or San Antonio, Texas. But a lot of the other teams across CrowdStrike have remote opportunities as well. Most internships are paid, but you're not paid a relocation or housing allowance if you need to move somewhere else like Texas or St. Louis. So just some things to keep in mind. You do need to be pursuing a bachelor's degree or higher to qualify. And the other key thing is if you want to be an intern with us for a summer, you can't be graduated yet. You still have to go back to at least one more year of school after the summer period. So more information is posted there. Basically, point of contact, if you have any interest in joining CrowdStrike as an intern over the summer, highly encourage you to do so. That point of contact there on that slide is the key place to go, university.recruiting@crowdstrike.com. If you're also more than welcome to reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm active on LinkedIn. I'm happy to facilitate that as well for anybody who may have that interest. Please take advantage. And lastly, I'll be done after this for Q&A. I did want to share about what we have in the Air National Guard as far as opportunities. Apologies for the typo there on the top there for Washington Air National Guard, but please ignore that. Otherwise, the Guard is a great thing. I highly encourage you to consider. It's something that's not well known, but essentially here in the state of Washington, we have 4 different squadrons in the Air Guard that are all focused on cyber operations in one way or another. 2 on the west side of the state over by Joint Base Lewis McChord, and 2 over here based in Spokane at Fairchild Air Force Base. I'm the commander for the 256th Intel Squadron, which is one of the ones at Fairchild, but I'm familiar with the other units as well. And these are opportunities where you can join, and it is becoming a member of the military, and you're gonna have to do some initial training period for up to 12 months when you factor in basic training and going to school. But when you're young and single and don't have kids yet, those are a great time to go do those things. And then you come back and it's 1 weekend a month plus about 15 days a year over the summer usually for annual training. So that's your obligation for doing your reserve duty with the unit. You do also have to maintain the health and fitness standards too. So it's not necessarily for everybody, but for those who want to do it and can do it, it's an outstanding experience because you get that real world military training. Then when you do your annual training or your drill weekends, you're for the most part doing real world stuff. So in our unit, you're training, but you are actually working with intelligence community agency partners or the cyber command, cyber mission teams doing real world missions. So you get that sort of live fire real world training and experience and skills. It's going to hugely boost your eligibility and competitiveness for your civilian career jobs that you're applying to. And not just that, but you're going to meet people in these units who work in desirable places So across the Washington Guard, we have people that work, well, of course, there's 4 of us across the Guard who work at Crowdstrike. There's several of us that work at Amazon, at Microsoft, at F5. I mean, you name it. There are a lot of great people to meet through this sort of opportunity, and there honestly, there's no better way to get to land an interview than to know somebody personally who's going to be able to get your resume in front of a hiring manager. There's a lot of other benefits here. Health insurance that's much better than anything you'll find through your civilian employer. You get tuition assistance opportunities. You're going to get a security clearance, which is worth tens of thousands of dollars if you're looking for government types of jobs that require security clearances. You do get paid the whole time you're drilling or doing your training. You get a retirement plan out of it. That was probably my biggest motivation initially. Turns out I now appreciate it for many of the other reasons. And bottom line, it's an excellent way for you to give back, for you to serve your country, your state, your communities. Because in this line of work, there's a lot of threat activity out there, globally speaking. You see it in the news every day. To offer your training and skills for the greater good of our society, there's really no better way than to do this if it works for you and if it's the right fit. So if that's the case, please also reach out to me if you're interested. I've also got a phone number there. You can call our squadron directly. If you want further information, Sergeant Lauren is the main point of contact there. He is awesome. He would love to talk to you. Very easy guy to talk to. He can answer any further questions. I can answer further questions. To wrap up, there again is my contact info. Reach out to me on LinkedIn for either the internship or the Air Guard opportunities, and super happy to help facilitate any of those connections that people might be interested in. And so with that, I will wrap it up. Apologies if I went a little long, but did want to leave some time for Q&A with what we have remaining. So back to you, Noel.
Yeah, we already have a question. So
Great.
How big of a role does machine learning play at Crowdstrike? I'm sure likely uses a lot of machine learning for anomaly detection to detect threats, so you can respond to them, but what does that look like?
Yeah, excellent question. Definitely a huge piece of what we do. So I mentioned the Falcon sensor is our platform, the agent that goes on the endpoints. And with it, there are various machine learning capabilities that are built into the sensor. And so we have a large team of engineers, our data science team, dozens and dozens and dozens. I don't know how big they are, but they're big. And that's their job, is they're continually crafting new updated algorithms to update the machine learning models. And some of the models that exist on the sensors are like sensor based, where the machine learning is going to run on the sensor at runtime when a file is executed. Other times there's static models that'll look at files in a static nature on the sensor. There's also cloud-based models where after runtime, the behavioral telemetry will be sent up to the cloud, and then there's ML models there that will evaluate it in those cases. Next gen AV capability built into the sensor. So yeah, if you have interest in that, there are teams available here for you to apply to for sure.
Great. So Asifa, it looks like your first question.
Sure. Thank you very much, Karl. I'm one of the investigators in CySER. I really, really enjoyed your talk. I could take another 1 hour now if you were to speak.
Awesome.
I think you did an excellent job also along the way, trying to kind of remember this is an audience of students and give some advices and courses. So the question I really wanted to ask is already asked, and it's a student I know about machine learning. And so I think what I had wanted you to do was, in one of those pillars, you had 6 or so of them. That was how I would have liked you to comment on where machine learning shows up. But I think along the way, you've done that. So instead of making it a question, I'd just make it a comment that this is an excellent presentation. If you want to add anything on machine learning, I know some of us in CySER have got particular interest in that space. And I know machine learning in cybersecurity goes both ways. You would want your machine learning models to be secure, and there are people who would want to do that. And then you'd also want to use them like Nathan was saying for anomaly detection. And so if you want to add anything there, I know the audience here would appreciate learning more about machine learning. If you have said enough, then I would turn my question into comment and stop there. So.
No, very well taken, Asifa. Thank you for that input. I think that's totally fair. I will reevaluate that slide next time I give something like this. I guess I would have put that in that 6th catch-all bucket just because I'm not as, it's not the world that I'm in. I'm not on that team. I'm not, but point well taken. Thank you for the input.
Right.
Noah, I think you're next.
I just, on the topic of machine learning, I think that's very interesting. And I'm curious if there would be a way to acquire Crowdstrike products so I can, or well, I'm just fascinated with them. I'd like to see how they work. Would it be possible for a student to be able to get a hold of such products?
That is a great question. And I don't want to commit to something I'm not sure about. I think so. I think like research purposes for university students, there's a way to access it. If you could shoot me an email to that email address, here, I'll go back on my slide. So it's there. And I would be happy to investigate that for you. And yeah, I'll be happy to look into that. I'm not totally sure, but I think there are some ways for research purposes to do that.
Well, thank you, because we just wrapped up a huge thing with the club here at Central, the Cybersecurity and Ethical Hacking Club, and we got a few projects in the works, and I'm curious what exactly would be able to defend against it.
Nice.
Well, thank you. Thanks again
Awesome.
for the presentation. It was very nice. I loved it.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that.
Paul?
Hi, Carl. I was curious if students are interested in pursuing an internship with your organization this summer. What is the likelihood that they would be able to get one of those?
With Crowdstrike, you're talking, right?
Yes.
So they're, like I said, they're looking to hire 230 interns total nationally. I don't know how many they've got lined up currently. As far as odds of landing the internship, I don't know like how competitive or how many they turn away. I know there was one guy from my squadron who was a student. He put in for an internship 2 years ago and he was able to get it without much hassle. I'm guessing they probably do turn some people away. I don't know. It depends on largely if your resume and your application is close to what one of the teams bring on interns would be looking for. And so yeah, I wish I could give you a better answer as far as like rejection rate or acceptance rate, but I don't know for sure. But hey, there's nothing to lose by putting in an application. And again, if you do so, I'm happy to facilitate and try and put a good word in to get your foot in the door in the right spot.
And just in general, though, well, in theory, there should be opportunities available. The deadline hasn't closed for this summer.
That is my understanding when I last talked to the university recruiting internship team. Yes, I don't think it's too late. And I don't know how many they've filled out of those 230 yet. I imagine now's the time where it's starting to solidify. So if you are interested, I wouldn't hesitate. I'd get in an application as soon as you can.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, we probably have time for one more question. All right. Well, you were so clear, Carl, that you answered all the questions. So thank you so much for a very informative, and really thank you so much for also sharing I think the guard aspect and the opportunities that are there. I think as we look at our students, that's something, whether that's today or tomorrow in their lives, that's something that's a great opportunity. We do have some folks already in the ROTC, but I think that's really to be honest, something I hadn't thought about as we looked at our students is opportunities that they could have possibly in that particular perspective, but also realizing the structure that we already have in the state of Washington. That's very exciting. So
yeah, we're one of very few states that have this number of cyber units and opportunities available, and the National Guard Bureau designed it that way because of our tech hub, the Seattle area, and all the good stuff here in the north. I'm glad you brought it up again. I know Professor Van Wee and I have been talking maybe about you guys even coming as a cohort to visit the squadron at Fairchild, potentially. Hopefully something like that might work out. We'll see. Working through that, at least us to visit you one way or another, because it's yeah, there's a lot. We do have university students who are in our unit. It's definitely doable for students to join the Guard. Of course, ROTC students wouldn't be as good of a fit because you already got a plan ahead. So, but yeah, thank you all for the consideration.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. It was really a nice seminar, and we are thinking of taking you up on May 27th, Friday, for a visit there. Yeah, so we're in the process of getting driver's licenses and information you need.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Bernie.
Yeah.
all right, well, great. And if it's okay, Carl, if you can send me your PowerPoint so we can share that with the students. There was a lot of helpful information on there. And we'd like to share the recording as well as the PowerPoint on our website for our students. Particularly, not everyone's able to make it every week, so every other week. So that way they can also benefit from your talk and the recording.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. And our next seminar will be in 2 weeks. And hope everybody has a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you so much again, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.